My family turned against me in court, resulting in the heartbreaking loss of custody of my beloved son. Now, after my ex-husband also betrayed them, they find themselves in need of my assistance. To expose their deceit, I took the initiative to secretly record their confessions. Hello everyone, this is going to be quite an extensive account because there's a significant amount of background information that I need to provide to ensure everything is clear and makes sense. I am a 33-year-old woman who went through a divorce a few months ago, though the separation had been brewing for nearly a year before it officially concluded. I first met my ex-husband, James, through mutual friends when I was 25 years old. After 2 years of dating, we made the decision to move in together and eventually get married. James came from a family with traditional and conservative values, and they did not approve of cohabitation before marriage. As a result, we felt compelled to marry if we wanted to continue our relationship. I was deeply fond of James and didn't see any issues with marrying him. My parents supported our decision wholeheartedly, and within a year of living together, we tied the knot. Shortly after our marriage, I discovered that I was expecting a child, and both James and I were overjoyed. It felt as though our family was truly coming together, and everything seemed to be falling into place perfectly. However, the moment I announced my pregnancy, my in-laws began to pressure me to leave my job and dedicate myself entirely to motherhood. Compounding this challenge was the fact that my workplace was not particularly accommodating when it came to maternity leave. Given that I hadn't been employed with them for a long period, my maternity leave was expected to be especially brief. Faced with this dilemma, I carefully weighed the advantages and disadvantages and ultimately decided to resign from my job. This was not a decision I made in isolation, everyone around me had a say in it. James and his parents were adamant that quitting my job was the best course of action for the long term. They assured me that I simply needed to focus on raising our child, as James would handle the financial responsibilities. He confidently stated that he would bring in enough income to support our family, alleviating any financial concerns, allowing me to concentrate solely on motherhood. My parents and older brother also believed that it was in my best interest to quit my job and become a stay-at-home mother, much like my own mother had done. Although my mother had the option to return to work, she chose to prioritize being at home with her children. The pressure from both sides of the family was immense, and I ultimately decided to resign during my second trimester. At that point, everything seemed to be going smoothly, and I had complete trust in James, believing that he would never disappoint me. This trust was the reason I left behind a promising career to embrace the role of a stay-at-home mom. However, shortly after our son was born, I began to notice peculiar changes in James's behavior during the final months of my pregnancy. There was an undeniable shift in his demeanor, something felt off about his energy, though I couldn't quite pinpoint it. He appeared happy when our son was born, and I expected things to normalize, but instead, the situation deteriorated. James became increasingly irritable around me, and whenever I attempted to engage him in conversation, he would respond with sharp retorts. The only time he seemed genuinely content was when he was playing with our son. Aside from those moments, it felt like he was resentful of being at home with me. As a result, he began to spend extended hours at work, often inventing excuses to avoid spending time with me even on weekends. I struggled to understand what was going wrong, but I persevered, determined to make our marriage work because, unlike him, I still loved him and didn't want to give up on our relationship. This troubling pattern persisted for about 2 years following our son's birth. James would stay at work far longer than necessary, and even when he was home, he wasn't truly present with me. I couldn't exactly voice my frustrations because every time I brought it up, he would claim that he was exhausted from work and that being the sole breadwinner for our household was an overwhelming burden. This was incredibly hurtful because it wasn't that I was incapable of contributing financially, I had the potential to earn money myself. I had to rely on him because he had promised me that he would make things easier for me financially. On a few occasions, I even suggested that I could return to work, allowing us to share expenses and reducing the financial strain on him. However, he took offense to this idea, finding it insulting to his abilities. Additionally, he believed that my in-laws would disapprove of me going back to work, leading to further complications and difficulties with them. As a result, I continued to stay at home and focus on raising our son, which remained the sole source of joy in my life because James had changed so drastically. He was no longer the man I had married. About a year ago, I discovered that James had been having an affair with one of his co-workers. Uncovering this betrayal was incredibly challenging because, honestly, I had been suspicious for a long time. I had even snooped through his phone and laptop while he was asleep multiple times, but I found nothing incriminating. I knew all his passwords because he had written them down in his notebook, yet even that didn't help. It seemed as though he had nothing to hide, and I felt foolish for harboring doubts about him. I even went through his personal belongings in search of a burner phone or any evidence of his infidelity, but I found nothing. At one point, I began to believe that perhaps I was just being paranoid and insecure. However, fate had other plans, and the evidence of his cheating revealed itself in a way I couldn't have anticipated. James and I were hosting an extravagant birthday party for our son about a year ago, and he had invited his co-worker, the very woman he had been unfaithful with. She was a single mother with a son around our son's age, so I didn't initially find her presence unusual. James had also told me that she was a close friend, so I didn't think her invitation was out of the ordinary. After our son had finished cutting his birthday cake, I decided to go upstairs to my bedroom to change into something more comfortable for the party. However, when I entered my bedroom, I was shocked to find that James was already there, along with his co-worker, who was sitting on his lap. They were fully engaged in making out right in front of me. It took me a few moments to process the scene unfolding before my eyes. The first and most horrifying aspect was that they were in my bedroom, the most personal space in our home. Secondly, they didn't even bother to stop when they heard the door opening. I had to walk over to them and assert my presence, prompting them to finally pull apart. I believe they thought it would be amusing to engage in such behavior in my bedroom, perhaps seeking the thrill of doing so in a place where it was unexpected. However, they likely didn't anticipate the emotional devastation it would cause me. Although I'm not proud of my reaction, discovering the truth about James's infidelity triggered a profound emotional breakdown within me. In a fit of rage, I grabbed the co-worker by her hair and forcefully dragged her out of the room. I became unstoppable. Despite James being significantly stronger than me, he couldn't prevent me from taking action, and much of what happened that night is a blur, possibly due to a rage-induced blackout. I dragged her downstairs, with James trailing behind me, and pushed her into the center of the room where everyone was present. I don't recall the majority of what I said, but I was told that I hurled numerous derogatory names at her and detailed the extent of her and James's betrayal in my bedroom. In that moment, I didn't even care that our son and several of his friends were witnessing the scene. Looking back, it was incredibly embarrassing and inappropriate, but at the time, it didn't even cross my mind. I was simply screaming at the top of my lungs, unleashing all my pent-up emotions. My parents, my brother, and my in-laws were all present during the incident. It was my father who eventually managed to calm me down and escorted me back to my room. Once inside, I completely broke down and began to cry uncontrollably. Instead of staying by my side to comfort me, my father locked me inside my room and returned to the rest of the house. I should have realized immediately that my parents prioritized appearances over genuine support, but it was still shocking. No one checked on me for the next few hours, and even after I had managed to regain some composure, I had no idea what was happening outside my room. I didn't have my phone with me, so I couldn't reach out for help. It wasn't until after midnight that my brother finally came to escort me out of the room. He didn't even ask how I was feeling. They might have kept me confined longer if I hadn't been desperately banging on the door. Upon emerging from my room, I inquired with my brother about what had transpired while I was locked inside. He informed me that everyone had left following my breakdown. He also mentioned that James had departed with his parents and our son, leaving only my parents and him in the house. James had allowed me to leave my room so that we could discuss the next steps. However, my family's idea of a discussion involved insisting that I apologize to all the guests for my outburst at the party. Not only that, but I was also expected to apologize to my in-laws and James for my behavior. They told me that James had a difficult time convincing his co-worker not to press charges against me because what I did was considered an act of physical violence against her. Therefore, they insisted that I owe it to him to discuss and resolve the situation instead of escalating it further. I was livid at their demands and told them to leave my house, refusing to let them dictate that I had to apologize to my unfaithful husband. This led to a massive argument with my family, as they insisted that I owed it to James to mend our relationship and give our marriage another chance. They even threatened to sever ties with me if I didn't comply. In response, I told them to go ahead because I had reached a point where I no longer cared about their opinions or judgments. I was determined to file for divorce and extricate myself from the toxic situation without needing anyone's permission. The very next day, I contacted a lawyer and proceeded to file for divorce. Within a week of the incident, James was served with the divorce papers. He had the audacity to appear disappointed and shocked upon receiving the documents. He returned home the day he was served and demanded an explanation. I informed him that there was no possibility of reconciling after everything he had done and the way he had insulted me. This led to a heated verbal argument where I hurled numerous insults and called him many names. In the heat of the moment, he made a promise that I would never see our son again, a promise I didn't realize he would fulfill. The legal battle began shortly thereafter. The divorce proceedings were relatively straightforward compared to the custody battle that followed, as we had minimal joint assets. The house was solely mine, purchased with my own funds, so there was no dispute over its ownership. Everything else was slated to be sold, with the proceeds divided between us. We just had to wait for 6 months due to the mandatory waiting period in our state, after which, once we reached a settlement, the divorce would be finalized. The only point of contention was the alimony I was entitled to. Since I had been forced to leave my job and didn't have sufficient personal funds, I required financial support. James argued that I shouldn't receive any alimony at all, despite his earlier assurances that he would support me and ensure I never had to work again. Fortunately, I had a few text messages that served as evidence of his promises, which were crucial in securing the alimony I was rightfully owed. Emotionally, the divorce process was somewhat easier for me to handle because, in my mind, I had already disconnected from James. However, the custody battle was what truly devastated me. Unfortunately, my parents and brother decided to betray me for financial gain. My ex-husband and his lawyer were unscrupulous, launching a campaign against me by portraying me as an irresponsible and unstable mother, arguing that I was incapable of raising our son on my own. Their goal was to secure full custody for James and his parents. I assumed that my parents and brother had been financially compensated by my ex-in-laws to testify against me, given their apparent wealth and the lack of any other plausible explanation for their sudden betrayal. In fact, I'm fairly certain they even began ingratiating themselves with my in-laws initially because of the financial incentives, given that my father's business had failed, leaving them desperate for income. James accused me of being an unfit and incapable mother, claiming that I was a functioning alcoholic with severe anger issues. They fabricated several incidents to support these allegations, asserting that I had lost my temper and put our son in danger, claims that were entirely unfounded. They needed to portray me as the antagonist, and I thought that at least some people would support me in this struggle. Unfortunately, all my friends sided with James, likely due to my public meltdown at our son's birthday party. The most devastating betrayal came when my parents and brother also testified against me in court, asserting that I required rehabilitation and intensive therapy before being allowed near our son. They claimed that I was not in a stable state of mind, which probably contributed to James's decision to cheat on me because he was tired of dealing with my supposed issues. Despite putting up a strong fight with my lawyer, the odds were heavily stacked against me, and I was unable to secure custody of my son. The court had little faith in my ability to raise him, and my efforts to present evidence of my capabilities were ultimately futile. A few months ago, the court delivered its verdict, and that was the last time I saw my son in person. I was granted supervised visiting rights, but James never allowed me to see him, rendering it nearly pointless. Our son is now 4 years old, but he barely has the opportunity to spend time with me. I live in constant fear that he might forget about me as he grows older. However, some relatives who still support me have managed to maintain contact with him, frequently sharing photos of our son. James and our son continue to live with my in-laws, ensuring that everyone else can still see him, but I am completely cut off. The thought of being completely estranged from my son is more heartbreaking than anything I can imagine. I had been surviving solely on memories of my son and myself, believing that he was being well cared for by James. I doubted my ability to provide him with a comfortable life on my own salary, especially since I was just starting out in my career. I managed to secure a job at a friend's startup company, but it's still in its early stages and doesn't pay much at the moment. My salary is modest, especially for a woman in her 30s, and even the other employees are mostly in their early 20s, working primarily for experience and better opportunities elsewhere. I do receive alimony payments each month, but they are insufficient to maintain the lifestyle I once had. I can't live like a bachelor by cutting costs drastically, but given the significant gap in my resume due to my time away from work, I had hoped that once I improved my circumstances, I could apply for shared custody again and potentially have a chance at reclaiming my son. However, fate had other plans. A couple of weeks ago, my parents reached out to me after months of not speaking, asking for my help. They needed me to bail them out because, surprisingly, James was not the exemplary person they had believed him to be. My brother sent me an urgent email, stating that I needed to come to their house as soon as possible because they had uncovered something significant. They admitted that they were tired of hiding things from me and wanted to reconnect and be a part of my life once more. Initially, I tried to ignore the email, but I couldn't shake the thought that this might somehow help me regain custody of my son. Eventually, I decided to visit them that evening. When I arrived, I expected them to be living luxuriously, having profited from betraying me for money from my ex-in-laws. Instead, I found them living worse than before. Despite their financial downfall, my son was overjoyed to see me, which was the silver lining of an otherwise disappointing evening. As soon as I stepped through the door, they began pleading for my forgiveness, admitting how badly they had messed things up and expressing their desire for reconciliation. However, when they approached my ex-in-laws to discuss the money that had been promised to them, James informed my family that those promises were void. Apparently, the idea that they would be generously compensated in exchange for testifying against me was never formalized in writing. If my family attempted to reveal the truth about the verbal agreements, James threatened to ensure they would never see my son again. For the sake of our son, they decided to keep silent, even though they weren't receiving any payment as promised. Their situation worsened because they had been exploited not only by being forced to testify against me but also by being treated as free babysitters. James would drop off our son at my parents' house every day, requiring them to watch him while sacrificing their own time and energy. This was incredibly inconvenient, as both my father and brother had jobs to attend to, and my mother, due to her age, couldn't manage all the household chores and caregiving responsibilities on her own. Consequently, either my father or my brother had to work from home every day, which became increasingly challenging. This strain was the primary reason they reached out to me, seeking assistance to finally put an end to this untenable situation. They proposed that if I provided the money that my ex-in-laws had promised them, they would take my side in the ongoing court battle and ensure that I regained custody of my son. I was on the verge of proposing a similar arrangement myself, but it wasn't entirely surprising given my family's long-standing materialistic tendencies, especially now that my father's business had failed, forcing them back into conventional jobs. They were desperate for money more than ever, as my father wanted to retire but didn't have sufficient savings because he had invested all his funds into his failed business venture. They suggested that they could fabricate a story about being coerced and pressured into testifying against me, thereby avoiding charges of perjury while under oath. However, they had no real evidence or documentation to support this claim. Little did they know that I no longer needed their help. I had been meticulously recording everything they said from the moment I arrived at their house because I sensed that something was terribly wrong and didn't want to take any chances. This meant I had all their confessions on record. Nevertheless, I instructed my family to send me any screenshots or evidence they had to prove that they had been deceived and lied to. Afterward, I agreed to help them out and left their house. I had already seen my son and had amassed more than enough proof to file for custody once again. The very next day, I worked with my lawyer to initiate the custody proceedings, this time fully prepared. The custody case is still ongoing, but one thing is certain, I will be able to demonstrate that none of James's accusations against me were true and that my family had been deceitful all along. I have already played the recordings I made, which have significantly swayed the court in my favor. James and his lawyer are now frantically searching for evidence to support their claims, while I sit back and observe, enjoying the turn of events because I know exactly what they had put me through and now, in turn, I get to expose their actions. It's the perfect example of karma, and I couldn't be happier about it. The only downside has been their relentless claims that I, too, have exploited them by recording their conversations without their consent and using it against them. They argue that I had no right to do so. However, under the laws in my state, such recordings are entirely permissible and admissible in court. Initially, I didn't understand their objections until they clarified that they felt I had betrayed their trust by recording them. These are bold accusations coming from people who themselves betrayed my trust by siding with my ex-husband in the custody battle. They viewed my actions as wrongful because they believed their testimonies were necessary solely for financial gain, yet I didn't need to jeopardize their integrity by risking perjury charges. They had already agreed to assist me and testify against James and his family, so there was no need for me to deceive them or act behind their backs. Lately, they have been bombarding me with incessant texts, making it increasingly difficult for me to ignore their demands. They accuse me of betraying them by going behind their backs and jeopardizing them with potential perjury charges. Update 1 ***. Hello everyone, the custody case is still in progress, and James along with his lawyer are putting forth their utmost efforts to validate their claims, likely because they are facing serious charges that could result in felony convictions and potential jail time. However, this isn't something that concerns me at the moment, and it never should have been a worry for me in the first place. I don't understand why I was ever concerned about my parents when they clearly didn't have any concern for me during my time of need. As it stands, it's really just a tit-for-tat situation now. The comments section has highlighted how entitled my parents were, which was eye-opening. Regardless, I have severed all ties with them, they can go their own way. My priority is my son's well-being, and I've waited long enough to secure his happiness. I'm not going to let my family manipulate or victimize themselves by betraying me for money. I don't see any reason to show them any loyalty anymore, I'm done. Update 2 ***. The good news is that I have finally been granted custody of my son. I have never felt such happiness in my entire life. Additionally, James and my in-laws were charged with perjury, and it's likely they will face jail time for their deceitful actions. I'm certain they are regretting everything they did, but honestly, I couldn't care less because I achieved what I always wanted, to have my son back. That's all I ever asked for. From what I understand, James is still fighting the charges and trying to avoid jail, but I doubt his efforts will succeed. I have already filed for a restraining order against all of them because I've been receiving very threatening text messages, and I am absolutely certain that these threats are coming from them. Nobody else would want to harm me in this way. The past few weeks have been incredibly hectic and stressful, but I am learning to take things slowly. I desperately want to spend more quality time with my son, so I have decided to reduce my work hours. I am also considering selling our house and moving to a smaller apartment to save more money. There is still much work to be done in rebuilding my relationship with my son. Although he is happy to be with me, he still asks about his father and his grandparents, and I struggle to know what to tell him. He has shared a few details about his time living with his grandparents, mentioning that he mostly stayed with them while his father and my in-laws were only there part of the day. When I asked him how it was living with his grandparents, he made a face and said it wasn't that great because there was constant fighting. It sounds like they gave him a difficult environment, possibly because they didn't want to take on the responsibility of caring for him. I can't fathom why they would treat a child that way, but I couldn't be entirely surprised given their behavior. They were certainly capable of making a young boy feel bad about himself. However, I don't have to worry about that anymore because he is now with me. Update 3 ***. Hi everyone, I can't believe I'm back here after nearly 5 years. It feels surreal to reflect on how drastically my life has changed. 5 years is a long time, and so much has happened. For one, my son is much older now, and we share a beautiful and strong relationship. After numerous therapy sessions, we have finally become the mother and son we were always meant to be from the very beginning. He is growing into a wonderful young man, and I am confident he will turn out to be nothing like his father because I know in my heart that he is a good person. He is now 9 years old and already a perfect little gentleman. I am raising him on my own, and I have full custody because James abandoned us and moved to Europe after he was released from jail. I'm not surprised that he left with a co-worker he had been cheating with, and now they are married. It's as if he replaced his biological son with another child, which is absolutely horrifying, but that's the kind of person he is. As for my parents and brother, they were released from jail after serving 6 months for their involvement in perjury and manipulation. We have not maintained any contact since their release, and they have made no attempts to reach out to me, which I am thankful for because I don't believe I have anything left to say to them. I have no news about my in-laws, I haven't heard from them in years, and I believe it's for the best. My life is now stable, I have a secure job and a steady income, thanks to God's grace. I continue to work at the company I started with my friend's business, and it's thriving. Life has turned out wonderfully for both me and my son, surpassing all my expectations. I am truly grateful for everything we have and the happiness we share.